I woke up on the morning of my husband's funeral with a strange kind of silence hanging in the house, too heavy, too still, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Tom's jacket was still draped over the kitchen chair where he left it 2 days before he collapsed. I pressed my hand to it, and it was cold. That coldness went straight through me. My old iPhone buzzed on the table. For a second, I prayed it was my son, Mark, saying he was on his way early, saying he wanted to stand beside me today. But the screen only showed a short message. Mom, Jenna's friend has a big celebration this morning. I might be a little late. Late. He said late. On the morning we were burying his father. My heart sank so fast I had to hold onto the counter to steady myself. I didn't cry. Maybe I should have. But grief had emptied me out in ways I didn't know were possible. Instead, I quietly folded the black dress I'd ironed the night before and placed it on the bed like it belonged to someone braver. Outside, the old Toyota Camry sat in the driveway. The same car Tom insisted we keep because she still runs like a lion. I stared at it for a long moment, wishing he were still inside it, honking for me to hurry the way he always did. I brewed a small pot of coffee and forced myself to take a sip, even though it tasted like nothing. My hands shook slightly as I pinned the simple silver brooch on my dress. Tom had given it to me on our 30th anniversary. The metal felt colder than I remembered. A knock startled me. When I opened the door, there stood my neighbor, Linda, holding a tray of homemade muffins so burnt on one side they looked like charcoal. "Oh, honey," she gasped, seeing my face. "I tried baking at 5 in the morning. The oven betrayed me." Her dramatic disappointment made me almost laugh. Almost. She came inside anyway, fussing around my kitchen like she could chase sadness away with her voice alone. "Is Mark coming separately?" she asked casually, not knowing the words were a blade. I swallowed. "He said he might be late." Linda froze. "Late? For his father's funeral?" I quickly forced a smile. "Traffic, maybe." "On a Saturday?" I shrugged. She didn't push further, but the look she gave me, half concern, half disbelief, burned right through my chest. As more relatives arrived, they asked the same question. "Where's Mark?" And every time I gave the same soft, embarrassed answer. "He's on his way. He'll be here soon. He must be stuck." Each excuse tasted bitterer than the last. By the time I stepped into the quiet chapel, clutching the folded obituary papers in my trembling hands, the empty seat beside me felt like a cruel spotlight. Everyone noticed it. No one said anything, but I felt their eyes, their pity, their questions. And in that moment, standing in front of my husband's coffin without my son next to me, I realized something I never thought a mother would ever have to admit. I was no longer sure if my child still saw me as family. The chapel smelled faintly of lilies and old wooden pews, the kind of scent that usually comforted me. But today, it only reminded me of everything I had lost. I sat in the first row, my hands folded tightly over the small obituary pamphlet. The seat beside me, where Mark should have been, felt like a wound. Pastor Lewis stepped up to the podium, clearing his throat gently. He was kind-hearted but famously terrible with technology. So when he tried to read Tom's eulogy from his iPad, the brightness suddenly shot up, nearly blinding him. "Oh, good heavens," he muttered, squinting. Behind me, someone stifled a laugh. Even I almost smiled. Tom would have found it hilarious that his funeral included a battle with screen brightness. Then Pastor Lewis talked about Tom's favorite things: mowing the lawn even when he didn't need to, fixing the old Toyota Camry like it was some kind of classic car, and drinking weak coffee because, according to him, strong coffee hides the flavor of life. People chuckled. I did too. But inside, every memory scratched another layer off my heart. Throughout the service, I kept turning my head toward the chapel doors, imagining Mark rushing in, hair messy, tie crooked, apologizing breathlessly. But the doors stayed still. At one point, my old iPhone vibrated in my purse, and with a sudden rush of hope, I grabbed it. A spam text. Something about car insurance. My throat tightened. When the service ended, relatives lined up to hug me. Some whispered, "You're so strong." Others said, "He's in a better place." But there was a certain glance, soft, pitying, confused, that I saw again and again. The unspoken question, "Where is your son?" Linda approached last. Her eyes were gentle. "Honey, I saved you a seat in case Mark showed up." I nodded, pretending that didn't break something inside me. As we stepped outside, the wind picked up, blowing my hair across my face. I caught sight of a tall man carrying a large Starbucks cup. He waved at me awkwardly. "Sorry, ma'am," he said. "They said no drinks in the chapel." I blinked, confused. Turns out he'd tried to give the cup to Pastor Lewis earlier, thinking the pastor needed caffeine. Linda whispered to me, "People are strange at funerals." I couldn't help it. A small laugh slipped out. It felt like a tiny crack of light in a dark room. After everyone left, I stood alone beside Tom's coffin as the funeral staff prepared for the burial. I touched the smooth wood, whispering, "He should have been here with us." Back home, the silence waited for me again. The house somehow felt smaller without Tom's presence, and colder without the sound of another person inside. I placed my purse on the kitchen table, noticing the chair where Tom used to read the newspaper every morning. I sat there, hoping the familiar spot might comfort me. But instead, the truth finally hit me with full force. Tom was gone. Mark hadn't come. And the part of me that still believed family could hold together through anything broke quietly in that empty kitchen. I had barely taken off my shoes when I heard a car door slam outside. For a moment, my heart lifted, some foolish part of me still expecting Mark to burst in with an apology big enough to stitch the whole day back together. Instead, the front door swung open and Mark walked in carrying a half-empty Starbucks cup, looking more like someone who had just finished brunch than someone who'd missed his father's funeral. "Mom," he said, smiling too quickly, "sorry we're late." The event ran longer than expected. Event. That word stung more than I expected. Jenna followed behind him, dressed in a sparkly top, entirely inappropriate for any hour after a funeral. She smelled like expensive perfume and party food mixed together. "Oh, Mary," she exclaimed dramatically, "you would have loved the place." They had this huge photo booth and live music, like a mini red carpet. She twirled a little as if still riding the high of it. I stared at her, wondering how someone could step into a grieving home acting like they'd come from a movie premiere. Mark put his Starbucks cup onto the counter beside a small Amazon box I hadn't opened yet. "Mom, you should have seen who was there," he said, leaning forward like he was telling me some secret. "I made some really important connections for our plan." I frowned. "What plan?" Jenna jumped in before he could answer. "Oh, our business. We're thinking of opening a cafe/event space, something modern, something fresh. The lady who hosted today is super successful, and she said she'd love to collaborate." I tried to process her words, but my head felt heavy. "Mark, this isn't really the day to..." He cut me off gently, as if talking to someone fragile. "I know, Mom, but opportunities don't wait, and well, we're gonna need some collateral to get the loan approved." A strange tension tightened in my chest. "Collateral?" He hesitated. Jenna didn't. "Well, the bank likes when families work together," she said lightly. "Your house has great value, and once the cafe takes off, you'll be glad you helped. It's practically risk-free." I stared at her, speechless. The room felt suddenly colder. Before I could respond, the back door creaked open. It was Linda. She froze when she saw Mark and Jenna, then glanced at the Starbucks cup on the counter. "Oh," she said, squinting at it. "Is that mine?" "I left one at the grocery store earlier." She walked over, lifted the cup, sniffed it, and made a face. "Nope, this one tastes like sadness and too much syrup." Mark blinked, confused. I nearly choked on a laugh I didn't want to have, and Jenna looked personally offended on behalf of Starbucks. Linda then leaned toward me and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You doing okay, sweetheart? I brought back your Tupperware. It's cleaner than when you gave it to me. Dishwasher miracles." In that tiny, unexpected moment, I felt a small thread of comfort stitch itself into the day. But when Mark finally said, "Mom, can we talk about signing those papers soon?" the thread snapped. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something had shifted inside me. Maybe the funeral hadn't been the only thing ending today. A few weeks after the funeral, I found myself sitting in the waiting room of Alex's small law office, clutching my purse like it was the only steady thing left in my life. The place was quiet except for the humming air conditioner and the soft ticking of a cheap wall clock that sounded louder the longer I listened. Someone had left an old Kindle on the coffee table with a cracked corner, and for a moment I wondered if Tom would have tried to fix it out of habit. Mark and Jenna arrived 5 minutes late, dressed like they were attending different events altogether. Mark wore a business shirt he hadn't ironed properly. Jenna looked like she was headed to brunch. "Sorry, traffic," Mark mumbled. "There was no traffic. I knew it. He knew it." Alex invited us into his office. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the blinds were half crooked, letting in stripes of Florida sunlight. It was all strangely comforting in its simplicity. "We're here to review Tom's updated will," Alex began gently. My stomach tightened. "Updated?" I didn't know Tom had changed anything. Mark leaned forward, smiling like he already knew the outcome. Jenna crossed her legs, tapping her heel impatiently. Alex continued. "Tom made revisions a few months before he passed. He designated Mary as the primary inheritor of the house, the savings, and the insurance payout." Mark's smile faded instantly. Jenna's eyebrows shot up. "Wait," Mark said, forcing a laugh. "Dad told me I'd be taking over the house someday." Alex's tone stayed neutral. "He still left you something. A personal letter. But, per Tom's instruction, it's to be opened only if you attended the funeral." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mark stared at Alex. "So I don't get to read it? Ever?" Alex shook his head softly. "Your father was very clear." I felt my throat close. A part of me wanted to defend my son, to explain, to soften the blow, but I remembered standing beside Tom's coffin alone. My hands trembled. Jenna broke the tension with a loud sigh. "Well, this is incredibly unfair. Mark is his son. Shouldn't that count for something?" Before Alex could reply, my iPhone buzzed inside my purse so loud it startled me and Mark both. I scrambled to silence it, only to find it was a notification for a grocery store coupon. Jenna rolled her eyes. Mark rubbed his forehead. Alex slid a box of tissues toward us, but when he did, the whole stack tipped over and fell onto the floor. "Oh, sorry," he muttered, dropping to his knees to pick them up. I let out an involuntary breathy chuckle. It was the tiniest crack in the heavy atmosphere, but it didn't last. Mark turned toward me, eyes sharp with hurt and confusion. "Mom, did you know about this? About any of this?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, I didn't." Yet as I sat there watching my son struggle between pride and disappointment, a strange truth settled over me. Maybe Tom hadn't been preparing for his death. Maybe he'd been preparing for this. The day after the meeting at Alex's office, I tried to keep myself busy. I swept the kitchen, reorganized the pantry, even dusted the living room shelves. Anything to keep my mind from replaying Mark's expression when he learned about the will. But by afternoon, I knew something was coming. A mother can feel these things in her bones. Sure enough, around 3 o'clock, I saw Mark's car pull into the driveway. Jenna stepped out first, holding an iced coffee in one hand and a glossy folder in the other. I braced myself. "Mom," Mark greeted, walking in like nothing was wrong. "We just want to talk." Jenna placed the iced coffee on the kitchen table, right next to an unopened Amazon box I'd forgotten about, and flashed a tight smile. "This won't take long," she said. Mark opened the folder. "These are the papers I mentioned before. The business loan, the café idea. We really need someone trustworthy listed as collateral." I stared at the papers without touching them. "Collateral, meaning my house." "Temporarily," Jenna chimed in, waving her hand like she was talking about borrowing a cup of sugar. "Once the café is up and running, everything will pay for itself. You'll barely even notice." I tried to breathe steadily. "Your father just passed? I'm not ready to make decisions like this." Mark softened his voice. "Mom, this could change everything for us. You'd be helping us build a future." A familiar ache spread across my chest. I remembered how Tom used to say, "Don't let guilt make your choices, Mary." But guilt was sitting right across from me, wearing a sparkly blouse. Just then, the back door creaked open. Linda walked in holding a plant pot, except the plant was hanging sideways, soil spilling everywhere. "I tried to repot your basil," she said triumphantly, "but it fainted." She blinked when she saw Mark and Jenna with the folder on the table. "Oh, is this one of those serious family meetings? Should I run?" Jenna shifted uncomfortably, brushing soil off her shoe. Mark tried to continue explaining, but the moment had cracked just enough tension for me to breathe again. When Linda finally left, with the pot still tilted, I turned back to Mark. "Son," I said quietly, "I need time, and I need to understand what I'm signing." Mark frowned. "There's nothing complicated. Just sign, Mom. We don't have weeks to wait." Something in his tone, sharp, impatient, sent a chill through me. I looked down at my trembling hands, then at the folder, then at my old iPhone, buzzing with a reminder for Tom's medical bill follow-up. A part of me wanted to help him, the way mothers always do, even when they shouldn't. But another part, the part that had stood alone at the funeral, spoke louder. "I'm not signing anything today," I whispered. Jenna snapped the folder shut. "Then everything will fall apart," she muttered. Maybe it would. But as they walked out of my house, leaving the iced coffee ring on my table and the faint smell of Jenna's perfume behind, a thought formed quietly inside me. Some things had already fallen apart, and maybe protecting what was left was up to me now. 2 weeks passed, and just when I thought things had finally quieted down, a thick envelope from the bank appeared in my mailbox. At first, I assumed it was another mistake, maybe a leftover insurance statement for Tom. But the moment I tore it open, my stomach dropped. "Notice of pending payment on your loan." My loan, my name, my address, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. I felt the blood drain from my face. My old iPhone slipped a little in my hand as I tried to steady myself. I read the letter again, slower this time, praying I had misunderstood. But no, there it was, page after page, confirming an active loan with my house as collateral. I grabbed my purse and walked straight to Linda's place. I didn't even knock properly. I just tapped once and pushed the screen door open. "Linda," I said, breath shaky, "I need your eyes on something." She was in the middle of wrapping a potted plant with aluminum foil to keep squirrels from getting ideas, as she put it. She blinked at the envelope in my hand and motioned me inside. We sat at her dining table, both of us squinting like we were trying to read sacred scrolls. "Lord, have mercy," Linda murmured as she adjusted her glasses. "Why are these letters always in font size microscopic?" I handed her my spare pair of reading glasses because hers kept sliding down her nose. She put them on, then frowned. "Mary, these make everything crooked. Do I look crooked to you?" She tilted her head. I almost laughed despite myself, but the fear pulled me right back in. "Linda, that signature, does it look like mine to you?" She studied the page, moving it closer, then farther, then closer again. "Well," she said slowly, "it looks like someone wanted it to look like yours. But you always make your Y's curl like a pig's tail. This one's straight and stiff. Looks like a signature on a bad celebrity autograph." I swallowed hard. "So it's not mine?" "No, honey, and whoever signed this wasn't even trying that hard." The room spun for a moment. I gripped the table edge. Just then, Linda called her nephew, Evan, who worked at a local bank branch. Within 20 minutes he arrived, wearing his work badge and carrying a to-go cup of lukewarm coffee. He read the documents carefully, his face tightening. "Mrs. Green, I don't want to alarm you, but this isn't just a misunderstanding. This looks like a forged document. If you didn't sign this, someone submitted the loan using falsified paperwork." My heart hammered. "What does that mean for my house?" "It means you need to contact an attorney immediately to freeze everything before the loan transitions to the next stage." I gripped the letter, my hands trembling. Mark, Jenna, their rushed tone, their eagerness, their insistence. Pieces fell into place so fast it hurt. Linda placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "Mary, I'm so sorry." For a long moment I couldn't speak. It felt like the world had shrunk into this tiny kitchen with its crooked blinds and foil-wrapped plant, and somehow everything inside me cracked at once. My own son had gone behind my back. And now, I might lose the only home I had left. I barely slept the night after Linda's nephew confirmed the forgery. I kept imagining the house disappearing, the walls fading, the memories with Tom dissolving like smoke. By morning, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my iPhone twice while calling Alex. He told me to come in immediately. When I arrived at his office, he had already printed several forms. Papers were spread across his desk in a way that looked both organized and chaotic at the same time. "Mrs. Green," he said gently, "we need to file an emergency injunction to freeze the loan process." I nodded, trying to breathe steadily. As he explained the legal steps, he reached for a stapler. Except it wasn't a stapler. It was a tape dispenser. He pressed it twice before realizing. "Oh," he murmured, clearing his throat. "I need more coffee." Despite everything, the corner of my mouth twitched. Grief is strange like that. It lets tiny, absurd moments slip through the cracks. We filed the paperwork, and 2 days later, We stood inside a small courtroom that felt colder than any room should be. The fluorescent lights hummed. A woman in the front row loudly opened a crinkly candy wrapper, earning a look from the judge that nearly made her choke on it. I clutched my folder against my chest, heart pounding. Mark and Jenna sat on the opposite side of the room. Jenna looked offended just by being there. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. When our case was called, Alex spoke first, presenting the documents, the inconsistencies in the signature, and the sudden timing of the loan application. Then it was my turn. I walked slowly to the stand, feeling every pair of eyes on me. My palms were damp. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. "Mrs. Green," the judge said gently, "do you recognize this loan agreement?" I swallowed. "No, I've never seen it until last week." "And is this your signature?" My breath hitched. The entire courtroom blurred for a moment. Then slowly, I shook my head. "No, Your Honor, that is not my signature." Across the room, Jenna shifted in her seat. Mark lowered his head, jaw tight. The judge continued, "Did you authorize your son or his wife to sign any loan documents on your behalf?" I closed my eyes as the truth pressed down on me. "No, I would never risk my home. I lost my husband 3 weeks ago. This house is all I have left." My voice cracked, loud enough that it echoed. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the candy wrapper lady froze mid-crinkle. Alex slid a box of tissues toward me. I took one, embarrassed but too broken to hide it. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was firm. "I'm granting the injunction. This loan is suspended pending further investigation, and based on what I'm seeing, there may be grounds for charges related to document falsification." Jenna's face drained of color. Mark looked like he'd been struck. As I stepped down from the stand, my knees nearly buckled. I had told the truth, but it felt like something inside me had shattered all over again. My son hadn't just let me down. He had crossed a line I never thought he'd approach. The months after the court hearing felt strange, like I was learning how to live inside my own skin again. For the first time in decades, the house was silent, not from grief, but from space. Real, breathable space, the kind that gives you room to think without drowning. I started working a few morning shifts each week at a small family diner down the road. Nothing fancy, just chipped mugs, sizzling bacon, and customers who always asked for the usual. I liked it. The rhythm kept my mind steady. The owners, a sweet couple in their late 60s, treated me like I'd always belonged behind their counter. Every morning before work, I walked a slow loop around the neighborhood park. Sometimes I carried a little paper cup of coffee. Sometimes I just held my old iPhone, listening to the birds or the faint hum of sprinklers turning on. I'd pass by parents pushing strollers, couples walking their dogs, older folks doing their gentle stretches. Life went on around me, quiet and uncomplicated. One Thursday, Linda convinced me to join her in a senior yoga class at the community center. It was supposed to be relaxing. Instead, she toppled over 5 minutes into the warm-up stretch and grabbed my arm on her way down. "I'm fine," she whispered fiercely, though she was still half tangled in her mat. The mat moved, not me. The instructor rushed over while I tried not to laugh too loudly. Healing sometimes comes disguised as ridiculous moments with the right people. At home, things slowly found their place again. I got into the habit of ordering small things from Amazon, mostly house supplies, sometimes a new set of gardening gloves, just to have something to look forward to at the door. Tom would have teased me for it, but gently. The biggest change came when Pastor Lewis suggested I join a volunteer group that visited patients in the hospital. Mostly older folks without family nearby. I hesitated at first, but something inside me said yes. The first time I walked into that bright, sterile hallway, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. But sitting beside people who were hurting too made my own wounds feel less alone. One woman, 89 and wonderfully blunt, told me, "Honey, if men didn't spend half their lives making messes, we wouldn't spend the other half cleaning them up." I laughed so hard my ribs hurt. She squeezed my hand. "Laughing is medicine. Use it generously." Slowly, my days began filling with things that weren't about loss anymore. The diner, the park, the hospital visits, Linda's chaotic plants. Evenings sitting on my porch, watching the sun fall behind the rooftops. The hurt didn't disappear. It softened, the edges dulled. One afternoon, after finishing my volunteer shift, my iPhone buzzed with a reminder. "Anniversary, Tom." I stopped walking. Instead of crying, I smiled. Small, shaky, but real. I'm okay, I whispered. For the first time, I meant it. It happened on a rainy Thursday, the kind of rain that makes the whole world look blurry, like someone smeared water over a painting. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counter when a hesitant knock rattled my front door. When I opened it, Mark stood there, soaked from the storm, holding a small Amazon box against his chest. His eyes were red, not from the rain. "Mom," he whispered, voice breaking, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. He moved like someone carrying invisible weights. The moment he crossed the threshold, he let out a shaky breath, as if my home, our home, still meant safety to him. He placed the Amazon box on the table. "I got you something." His hands trembled. "Well, not exactly for you, it's for Dad." I opened the box carefully. Inside was a simple wooden picture frame, plain and honest looking. "But the photo of him fishing," Mark said quietly. "The one he always liked." My heart twisted. He remembered. He sank into a chair, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. "Jenna left," he said. "She took the furniture, the TV, even the blender." He gave a hollow laugh. "I guess smoothies were more valuable than I was." Despite the ache inside me, I almost smiled at the absurdity. He continued, voice cracking. "I lost my job. They found out about the loan mess, and the guys at work, nobody wants to trust someone who forged." His breath hitched. "I didn't sign your name, Mom. Jenna did. But I didn't stop her. That's just as bad." For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft drip of his wet jacket onto my floor. I sat beside him. "Why didn't you come to the funeral, Mark?" He flinched like the question was a blade. I thought going to that party would help my career. "Jenna said it would make me look serious, successful." He wiped his eyes. "I didn't want anyone to see me as the guy who still needed his parents." That hit harder than I expected. He had been chasing approval from strangers while ignoring the people who loved him most. Just then, the back door opened slightly. Linda poked her head in holding a plate of cookies. "Oh, sorry. Didn't know you had company," she whispered, eyes widening at the sight of Mark crying. She tiptoed backward, then bumped into a potted plant and almost tripped. "I'm fine," she called out softly before disappearing. Even Mark let out a tiny, broken laugh. It was the first sound of life I'd heard from him all evening. He turned toward me, eyes wet but honest. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For the loan, for the funeral, for all of it. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but His voice cracked again. "I don't know where else to go." My chest tightened. I had waited so long to hear those words, yet they hurt more than any accusation could. I placed my hand over his. "I can't fix everything for you," I said softly, "and I can't let you hurt me again." He nodded, tears falling. "But," I continued, "you're still my son, and you don't have to face this alone." Lightning flashed outside the window, illuminating his broken expression. And somehow, in that trembling light, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who held my hand crossing parking lots, the one who believed this house was the safest place in the world. Maybe it could be again, but only if we rebuilt it honestly this time. The weeks after Mark returned were slow, quiet, and strangely gentle, like watching a wounded animal take careful steps back into the world. He found 2 part-time jobs, mornings at a hardware store, evenings delivering groceries. It wasn't glamorous, but he didn't complain, and that alone felt like a miracle. Sometimes I'd see him walking up the driveway after a long shift, shoulders slumped but eyes clearer than I'd seen in years. He always carried a paper cup of cheap coffee, nothing fancy, and he'd tap the mud off his boots before stepping inside. A small gesture, but one that told me he was trying. He didn't move back in. He rented a tiny room nearby, said he needed to learn how to stand without leaning on other people. I respected that. We settled into a new rhythm. On Sundays, he'd pick me up in Tom's old Toyota Camry, engine rattling just the way Tom liked to joke about, and we'd drive to the family diner where I worked. He'd help wipe down tables or carry crates for the owners, never expecting anything in return. One morning, Linda stopped by while Mark was fixing a crooked coat hook near my door. She squinted at him, hands on her hips. "You tightening that thing or tickling it?" Mark, startled, dropped the screwdriver, which bounced once and rolled straight under the couch. "Great," he muttered, cheeks flushing. Linda winked at me. A man's not truly redeemed till he loses a tool in an old lady's living room. I laughed harder than I had in days. Even Mark cracked a sheepish smile. Meanwhile, I continued volunteering at the hospital. The patients remembered my name. One of them, a retired teacher, told me she liked my stories because he talked like someone who still believes in people. I didn't know what to say to that, but the words stayed with me. Life stayed simple, purposeful, honest. And then came the evening that felt like a quiet turning point. Mark showed up after his shift, holding the wooden picture frame, the same one from the Amazon box, now polished and spotless. I was thinking, he said softly, maybe we could put Dad's fishing photo back up. I felt my throat tighten. Yes, I'd like that. We stood in the living room, the fading sun casting warm light across the walls. Mark held the nail while I guided the frame into place. His hands shook a little, not from weakness but from the weight of everything we'd survived. When we stepped back, the photo looked perfect. Tom standing at the pier, grinning proudly with a fish too small to brag about. It made me laugh every time. Mark stared at the picture, eyes glistening. "I'm trying, Mom," he whispered. "I know it'll take time." I placed my hand on his arm. "Trying is enough. Just don't stop." Outside, the sky was shifting into soft evening colors. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt lived in. It felt like home again. As we sat together on the couch watching the light settle around Tom's photo, a warm, quiet peace wrapped around us, gentle and honest, like forgiveness itself. We couldn't change the past, but we were finally learning how to live beyond it. There's a certain kind of peace that comes only after a storm. The kind that feels almost fragile, like a soft breath you're afraid to disturb. That's the peace I found myself living in. Months had passed since Mark and I rehung Tom's photo, and each day seemed to settle into a gentler rhythm. The pain that once pressed against my chest had softened, becoming something I carried without breaking under it. Sometimes it surprised me how healing can slip in quietly, like sunlight finding its way through blinds you forgot were cracked open. I still worked at the little diner a few mornings a week. The familiar sound of the bell at the door, the clatter of plates, and the warmth of people greeting me by name. Those small things stitched the days together. And at the hospital, the patients continued telling me stories of their lives, their regrets, their joys. Listening to them taught me that everybody carries something, and most of us are just trying to walk through life without dropping the pieces. Mark began rebuilding too. Slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. He didn't rush to prove anything anymore. Instead, he showed up. Small gestures, quiet efforts, steady changes. Some evenings he'd knock on my door just to hand me a cup of warm tea or update me on how work was going. I never pushed. I simply let him exist beside me, like two people learning a new language of love after years of speaking the wrong one. Every now and then, I'd catch him standing in front of Tom's photo, hands in his pockets, head bowed, not in guilt but in gratitude. It made my heart ache in a way that was strangely full. One chilled evening, I sat on the porch wrapped in a light blanket, watching the neighborhood lights flicker on one by one. The world felt steady, simple, human, real. I picked up my phone and whispered, "I'm all right, Tom." Because I finally was. Not because the hurt had disappeared, not because everything had been fixed, but because I had chosen to keep loving, even after everything. And somehow in choosing that, I found myself again.